Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I covered the Battle of Pickett's Mill. Now, Johnston probes the Union right flank for an opportunity. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. By the end of the day on May 27th, as both Union and Confederate units scoured the Pickett's Mill battlefield for their dead and wounded, word came that the Union left flank wasn't protected. Who exactly came up with the plan is debated. John Bell Hood claimed he conceived of the idea, and Joseph E. Johnston claimed he thought of the plan. Either way, it was decided that Hood would move his troops out of line and attack the Union left flank early on the morning of May 28th. When Hood's corps pulled out, Hardee and Polk extended their lines to the north in order to cover the required territory. When May 28th dawned, Hood's men pushed forward only to find that the Union soldiers on the left flank had dug in, and Hood was unwilling to attack a fortified position. Hood's men then settled back into their works. Reports began coming in to Johnston that Sherman was moving troops from his right to his left, but these reports were false. Sherman was planning on shifting to the left, but aside from a few units making the shift, the battle line looked basically the same as it had. Johnston now wanted William B. Bates' division of Hardee's corps to probe the Union right flank at Dallas and capture the entrenchments there if possible. Bate, a Tennessean, took part in the First Battle of Manassas, Shiloh, the Tullahoma Campaign, Chickamauga, and Missionary Ridge. He had been wounded at Shiloh and had multiple horses shot out from under him, demonstrating his courage in battle and his insistence on being on the front lines with his troops. Bate and his corps commander, William Hardee, came up with a plan for the dismounted cavalry to push forward, and if they encountered only light resistance or no resistance, for signal guns to fire, signaling for Bates' division to assault the Federal works. As the dismounted cavalry of Frank Armstrong prepared for their attack, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Montgomery of the 1st Mississippi Cavalry wanted to get a better look at the Union fortifications in his front. He climbed to a rise near a battery of artillery to view the Federals. I stopped a moment to look through an embrasure at the battery, and half-dozen Minnie balls hissed viciously by my head, and I quickly got behind the fortifications. I caught, however, a good look at part of their works, which seemed very strong and were well manned. Montgomery told his superior what he saw, but there was no change to be made to the plan. The cavalry would push forward at the appointed time. At 3:45 p.m., the signal gun went off for the Confederate cavalry to begin their advance. As one Union soldier described, they advanced with a yell the devil ought to copyright. The Union soldiers were mostly lounging about, some bowling coffee, and others taking a nap on this warm afternoon, not expecting an attack to occur in their front. In their advance, the rebels captured 3 cannons belonging to the 1st Iowa Artillery. From a little ways away, Sam Watkins of the 1st Tennessee Infantry watched the attack, writing, "We can see the line of dead and wounded along the tracks over which he passed, and finally we see our battle flag planted upon the Federal breastworks. I cannot describe the scene." The rebels got close to the works and even gained some of the outer perimeter entrenchments, but they couldn't gain a foothold. Plus, John Logan, the 15th Corps commander, rushed troops to the point of attack and drove back those rebels who did make it close enough to the fortifications. Armstrong withdrew his men from the fight. What happened next was a series of miscommunications that resulted in the senseless deaths of men from Bates' division. Bate himself realized from Armstrong's cavalry attack that the Federal troops were dug in and well supported, so he sent a courier to tell his 3 brigades of infantry that there would be no attack. The courier made it to Thomas Smith's brigade, but word never got to Jesse Finley's Floridians or Joseph Lewis's Kentuckians. During the attacks by Armstrong, Smith moved his brigade forward a short distance in preparation for an anticipated attack. The sound of battle rattled through the dense forest around Dallas, so much so that Lewis couldn't tell if the signal guns had went off. Lewis sent an aide to find Smith, but when the aide went to where Smith was originally located, he found an empty position and assumed Smith had already begun his attack and the Kentuckians were late. In reality, Smith's brigade was only a short distance away, but the forest concealed their presence. Lewis, not wanting to leave his comrades alone in the front ranks, making attacks, ordered his brigade forward. They drove in the first set of Union defenders from the breastworks and got to within 50 yards of the main line. Soon Finley's brigade, commanded by one of Finley's subordinates because Finley had been wounded at Resaca, made it to the front with Lewis. The two brigades fired volleys into John A. Logan's corps. Finley's brigade was the first to fall back, but the Kentuckians held on, determined to hold on to the ground they paid such a dear price for. Bate found his two brigades engaged with the enemy and ordered them to withdraw, which they did, but grudgingly. The Union defenders were convinced that all of Hardee's corps had attacked their position, so violent was the attacks. The Kentuckians began to complain about Bate and his suicidal attack, but it wasn't all his fault, and when he realized the mistake, he quickly corrected it. Nevertheless, the Confederacy lost around 1,200 men in the futile attacks, while the Union lost only 379. It was a one-sided fight, but it did convince McPherson and his two corps commanders that they couldn't shift to the left with such an aggressive force in their front.